I checked my watch without stopping. I hadn't been walking long. My pace hadn't changed. If someone started even 10 minutes before me, I should have caught up to them by now, or at least seen something. Again, the thought came and went. Trails bend. Visibility plays tricks. People step off to take breaks. I kept going. The forest closed in a bit tighter here. Pines gave way to thicker undergrowth. The air felt colder in the shade, heavier somehow, though I knew that was just temperature and elevation. My breath fogged more noticeably. The footprints led straight through it all. No pauses. No signs of stopping. No place where the stride broke or shifted. That struck me as mildly interesting. Most people hesitate at narrow spots, or adjust near roots. These didn't. I told myself the person was just experienced. Comfortable. Confident on uneven ground. I remember feeling almost amused by how much attention I was giving to something so small. It felt silly. Like my brain was looking for something to do in the quiet. I took another sip of coffee, slowed slightly as the trail dipped again, and let the thought go. I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel uneasy. I didn't feel any sense of danger. I was just walking a familiar trail, following behind someone I hadn't seen yet, on a cold, ordinary morning. And at that point, the footprints were still just footprints. Nothing more than that. After a while, I stopped actively looking for the footprints. They were just there. The trail bent to the left, cutting around a cluster of trees, and when I came out on the other side, I saw them again. Same boots. Same spacing. Still heading forward. I noticed them the way you notice a familiar landmark, automatic, almost unconscious. The ground changed soon after that. The snow thinned again, replaced by packed dirt and exposed roots. I watched the prints fade away as expected. The soil was too dry here. Too uneven. No way for a clean impression to hold. I walked another 30 seconds without thinking about them at all. Then the trail curved again. The snow returned in a shallow stretch between two rises, and the footprints were there waiting. Clear as before. Unbroken. As if nothing in between had interrupted them. That made me slow down, just slightly. Not enough that I would have noticed if someone asked me later. Just enough that my steps became more deliberate. I looked back along the trail behind me, checking for my own prints. They were there, layered faintly over the older ones in places, easy to tell apart if you paid attention. I remember feeling satisfied by that. It grounded things. The prints were real. Physical. Normal. I told myself the person ahead of me was probably walking a loop trail that reconnected farther up. That made sense. This forest had plenty of intersecting paths. Someone could easily appear to be ahead of you more than once without ever being close. That explanation settled in comfortably. A few minutes later, the trail narrowed near a rocky section where the ground sloped off to one side. Snow barely clung to the stones there. It was the kind of place where footprints usually disappeared completely. I focused on my footing as I crossed it, stepping carefully, feeling the cold rock through the soles of my boots. When I reached the other side, I looked up, and saw the prints again. They hadn't slipped. They hadn't staggered. They hadn't shortened their stride. They crossed the rocks the same way they crossed the snow. That was when I stopped matching their pace. I didn't stop walking. I just adjusted, intentionally stepping wider, breaking the rhythm. I wanted to see the spacing change. I wanted to see some difference that would confirm this wasn't worth thinking about. The spacing didn't change. I remember a quiet, almost embarrassed smile crossing my face. The kind you make when you realize you're paying too much attention to nothing. I shook my head slightly and looked up into the trees, letting my eyes rest anywhere but the ground. The forest felt the same as it always had. Cold. Still. Empty. When I looked back down, the prints were still there. Not always directly in front of me anymore. Sometimes they appeared just off to the side of the trail, close enough that I could see them clearly, but far enough that they weren't where I expected them to be. Parallel to my path. Keeping pace. That didn't last long. After another bend, they were back in the center again. I told myself the wind must have shifted loose snow around. That it was filling in some areas and uncovering others. It happens all the time in winter. Snow moves more than people think. That explanation worked. At least, it worked enough. The problem wasn't any single detail. It was how often I was noticing them now. Every few minutes, my attention returned to the ground. Not because something new had happened, but because the same thing kept happening in slightly different ways. Ahead of me. Beside me. Gone for a stretch. Then back again. Always leading forward. Always steady. The trail dipped into a shallow ravine where meltwater usually ran in warmer months. The snow here was thin and broken, mixed with frozen mud. Footprints rarely survived in this spot for long. I watched my own steps distort as I crossed, the ground giving way unevenly beneath me. Halfway through, the prints vanished. I felt a brief sense of relief I hadn't realized I was waiting for. They're gone, I thought. Finally. I climbed out of the ravine, boots scraping against the edge, and followed the trail as it leveled out again. 10 steps later, they were back. Same boots. Same direction. Same distance apart. I stopped thinking about who was ahead of me and started thinking about timing instead. About how long these prints had to have been here to look the way they did. About how far ahead someone would need to be to never come into view. I checked my watch again. Still early. Still normal. My breathing hadn't changed, but my awareness had. Sound seemed sharper now. My own steps louder. The quiet between them deeper. I told myself that if something were actually wrong, I would feel it. My body would react. I would know. But all I felt was mild confusion. A low-level irritation, almost. Like trying to remember where you'd seen something before. The trail curved once more, and when I rounded it, the prints were already there, waiting on the far side. That was when I realized I couldn't remember the last time I hadn't seen them. Not for more than a few seconds at a time. They were becoming part of the trail itself. As expected as the trees. As consistent as the bends. Still explainable. Still harmless. But no longer easy to ignore. And without meaning to, I started paying closer attention to every place they appeared, and every place they didn't. I checked my GPS without stopping. That wasn't unusual either. I liked knowing how far I'd gone, how much was left. It helped keep the walk measured. Familiar. Controlled. The screen lit up immediately. Signal was weak, but present. The map loaded. My position was right where it should have been, on the main trail, just past the ravine, moving north. That part was correct. The distance wasn't. According to the GPS, I had already walked farther than I should have. Not by a huge amount. A few tenths of a mile. Enough to notice. Enough to make me slow down and look at it again. I checked the trail marker up ahead. One of the old wooden posts with numbers burned into the side. I knew what it should say. I'd passed it countless times. It didn't match the GPS reading. I stood there for a moment longer than I had anywhere else so far. The cold crept in around my ankles. My breath fogged in front of my face, slow and even. GPS drift, I told myself. Tree cover messes with it all the time. I put the device away and kept walking. The footprints stayed with me. They crossed another section of exposed ground where I wouldn't have expected them to hold at all. The impressions were faint there, but still visible enough to follow. I noticed now that I wasn't stepping into them anymore. I was keeping a little distance, like my body had decided something before my thoughts caught up. The trail widened slightly near a junction. A secondary path branched off to the right, marked by a smaller sign. I slowed there, scanning ahead out of habit. That's when I saw someone else. He was coming toward me from the opposite direction, bundled in a dark jacket, head down, hands tucked into his pockets. Middle-aged, maybe. Average build. Nothing about him stood out. I felt a quiet sense of relief that surprised me with its intensity. We nodded at each other as we passed. The way people do when they acknowledge each other's presence without wanting a conversation. He hesitated. "Cold morning," he said. "Yeah," I replied. My voice sounded quieter than I expected. "Flat." He glanced down at the trail between us. "At the ground." "You following those two?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I followed his gaze. The footprints ran between our boots, uninterrupted. "Yeah," I said finally. "Guess someone started early." He nodded slowly. "Been seeing them on and off since the lower bend," he said. "Thought I was just catching up to somebody." He didn't laugh. He didn't smile. "Same," I said. We stood there for a moment longer than was comfortable. The woods pressed in around us, silent again. No wind now. No movement. "They don't seem to go anywhere," he added. I waited for him to explain what he meant. He didn't. After a second, he adjusted his jacket and stepped past me, heading back the way I'd come. His boots crushed lightly over the older prints as he went. I watched him until the trees swallowed him up. Then I looked back down at the trail. The footprints were still there. Unbroken. I didn't try to make sense of that. I didn't stop to test it. I just kept walking. My pace slowed without me deciding to slow it. My steps were quieter now. More careful. I was listening more than I had been earlier, though I couldn't have said what for. I took out my radio next. A small handheld tuned to the ranger station frequency. I carried it out of habit more than necessity. Coverage was usually spotty this deep in. I pressed the call button. Static answered first. Then a faint crackle. A voice tried to come through, clipped and distant. "Station, go ahead." "This is Trail 5, I said. "Just checking in. Can you confirm distance markers past the ravine?" Static again. Longer this time. I waited. The radio hissed softly in my hand. No reply. I tried once more. Same result. The crackle faded, then nothing at all. I lowered the radio and clipped it back onto my pack. The silence afterward felt heavier than before. Not loud. Just complete. I became aware of how little sound I was making. My breathing was shallow now. Controlled. I hadn't realized I'd changed it. The trail dipped again, then rose. The footprints kept leading. Always ahead now. No longer beside the trail. No longer shifting. I stopped checking my GPS. I stopped checking the time. I focused on the path directly in front of me. On each step. On the space between them. I didn't feel afraid. But the sense of control I'd had at the start of the walk, the sense that I knew where I was, how far I'd gone, what came next, had thinned out quietly, without any clear moment where it broke. The woods felt the same. The trail looked the same. The footprints remained. And for the first time since I'd started walking that morning, I realized I didn't know how long I'd been following them. I stopped without deciding to. One step ended, and the next one didn't come. My foot settled into the snow, and I stayed there, standing in the middle of the trail, breath slowly fogging the air in front of my face. I don't remember what made me stop. There wasn't a sound. There wasn't a movement. Nothing obvious changed. It just felt like the right moment to stop walking. The woods were completely still. Not quiet in the way they had been earlier, with distant creaks and shifting branches. This was different. No wind at all. No settling snow. Even my own breathing felt out of place, like something intrusive. I became aware of a faint movement in the air. Tiny white flecks drifting down, barely noticeable unless you watched closely. Snow. Not heavy. Not enough to make sound when it landed. Just enough to soften the edges of things. Just enough to change the ground. I stood there and watched it fall. Then I looked ahead. The trail stretched forward the way it always had. A gentle rise. Trees lining both sides. Snow-dusted earth. Empty. No footprints beyond where I stood. None leading forward. None fading into the distance. They were gone. I felt a small, quiet sense of relief at that. Something loosening in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. I told myself this was what I'd been waiting for. The moment the pattern finally broke. I exhaled slowly. Then I looked down. My own boots were pressed into the snow where I stood. Fresh. Clean. Dark impressions against the pale ground. I shifted my weight slightly and watched the snow crumble at the edges. And behind them, the footprints ended. Not faded. Not scattered. Not lost to terrain. They stopped directly behind me. The last pair sat just inches from my heels, perfectly formed, the snow inside them already beginning to collect again as flakes drifted down. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I could see enough without moving. The trail behind me was empty. No disturbance beyond that final set. No signs of anyone approaching. No marks where someone had stepped off the path. Just my own trail leading up to where I stood, and there's ending there. I became acutely aware of my body. The weight of my pack against my shoulders. The stiffness in my fingers. The way my jaw was clenched without me meaning to. My breathing slowed. I listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No fabric shifting. No breath that wasn't mine. The snow kept falling, soft and patient, settling into the prints behind me, rounding their edges, beginning the quiet work of erasing them. I told myself there had to be a simple explanation. That I'd misjudged where they ended. That the light was playing tricks on me. That I'd walked over them without noticing. But I didn't move to test any of that. I stood there, staring at the space just behind my boots, feeling the cold seep upward from the ground, and for the first time that morning, I became aware of how exposed I was on that trail. How open the woods were. How close everything suddenly felt. The falling snow made the silence heavier instead of breaking it. I remember noticing how loud my heartbeat sounded in my ears. How careful I was not to shift my feet. How the thought of turning around felt unnecessary, almost discouraged, as if the moment didn't require it. I stayed still. The snow continued to fall. And the woods did not respond. I left the trail without retracing my steps. Not quickly, not in a rush. I walked at the same slow, deliberate pace I had all morning, boots crunching against the frost. Each step felt heavier than before. Not from fatigue, not entirely. More like the weight of what had just happened, the realization that the footprints had ended behind me, perfectly, impossibly, and that no one had been there to step out ahead. I kept my gaze on the path, but my mind wasn't on the trail anymore. It wandered to the prints. To the sudden emptiness behind me. To how normal everything else looked, how familiar, how harmless. And yet, I felt a small, persistent pull in my chest, a sense that something was slightly off, just enough that I couldn't ignore it. The trail curved again, and I passed the familiar junction where another hiker had appeared earlier. Empty now. No one was there. Nothing had been left behind, No gear, no footprints, no evidence that anyone else had ever been on that path at all that day. I told myself it had been a coincidence, a normal occurrence. I repeated the rationalizations in my head. Someone had started late. Someone had walked a loop. The snow had shifted. The forest had a way of playing tricks on perception. It didn't convince me. Not really. I reached the parking lot sooner than expected. The gravel crunched beneath my boots in the same steady rhythm I had used the whole way. I looked at the trees beyond the lot, at the frozen underbrush, at the winding trail disappearing into the pines. The forest seemed unchanged, quiet and indifferent. The trail looked open and inviting, exactly as it always had. Nothing to indicate anything unusual had occurred. And yet I knew something had. I packed up my thermos. Locked the car. Sat for a moment, breathing in the cold air, letting it fill my lungs. Nothing moved. No other cars. No voices. Only the faint hiss of distant wind. I never hiked that trail alone again. Not at dawn. Not in winter. Not ever. I started bringing companions when I returned to other trails. I started checking in with people more often, leaving my plan and estimated return time with friends or family. The experience had changed something subtle in me, something careful and cautious that hadn't existed before. I never reported it. No call to the ranger station. No entry in a logbook. No evidence left for anyone else to find. The footprints, the GPS anomalies, the radio silence, they belonged only to that morning and to me. The trail is still open. People walk it all the time. Morning hikers. Dog walkers. Families. Solitude seekers. All moving past the same bends and curves where I had followed those prints, never knowing what had ended just behind me. Nothing officially reported. And that's what worries me most. Because the trail is still there. The forest is still there. And the footprints, well, I've never seen them again. But sometimes, when I drive past the lot in the early hours of winter, I can't stop my eyes from scanning the trail. Just in case. Just to see if the rhythm of someone else's boots has returned. The trail is still open. And it waits.